Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be talking about dual wielding in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now the game rules call this two weapon fighting, and basically you're fighting with a weapon in hand. In this video I'm going to kind of explain the basics of it and compare it against its two main competitors for melee fighting styles. And those are the sword and board, or actually spear and shield, as well as the two-hand, which is typically best with a pole arm, usually a glaive or a halberd. So here's our agenda. I'm going to kind of introduce and talk about what is dual wielding. I'll talk about its competitors a little bit, and then I'll do a comparison. I'm going to kind of talk about the differences between the styles and see mathematically how they line up. And then I'll do kind of a summary and final discussion about when it's good to use two weapon fighting or dual wielding. So, what is dual wielding? Well, as the game defines two weapon fighting in the player's handbook, when you take the attack action and attack with a light melee weapon you're holding in one hand, use a bonus action to attack with a different light melee weapon you're holding in the other hand. You don't add your ability modifier to the damage of the bonus attack unless it's negative, and if either weapon has the thrown property, you can throw it instead of making a melee attack with it. Now, importantly, this is just in summary of this, you have to take the attack action. You must be holding a light melee weapon in each hand, and the light tag basically denotes the weapon as eligible for dual wielding. Now, generally speaking, all of these weapons are going to be either a D4 or a D6 on the damage dice. Then it's a bonus action to attack with your other weapon, and your bonus action attack doesn't add your ability modifier to damage unless it's a penalty. There is a fighting style that you can use to fix this, and you can throw any weapons that have the light property and still qualify. Now, here's a list of all of the weapons that are light in the game. So we have clubs, which are a D4. We have daggers, which are a D4, and you can throw them, and they have the finesse property. We have the hand axe, which is a throwable D6. The light hammer, which is a throwable D4. The sickle, which is a D4. And the scimitar and short sword, which are martial weapons and are finesse D6s. So, the general purpose of dual wielding is to weaponize your bonus action for more damage. And unlike some other features, you don't need any class features to do this. You just need to be holding the weapons. Now, part of this is balanced by the fact that, the damage dice of light weapons are a D4 or a D6, so you're sacrificing the size of your damage dice in exchange for more attacks. Now, there are several ways you can improve two-weapon fighting. The first is the two-weapon fighting style, which is out of Fighter, and I think Rangers also have it. And you can get it with a feat potentially, but this lets you add your ability modifier to the damage of the bonus attack. So instead of that bonus attack, just being a D6, it'll now be a D6 plus strength or a D6 plus dex if you're using one of the better weapons. The next option is the dual wielder feat. So what this does is it gives you a +1 bonus to your armor class while you're holding a melee weapon in each hand, and it also removes the light tag restriction, which means you can now dual wield 1d8 damage dice weapons. So that's things like long swords or battle axes or warhammers, that kind of thing. And you can also draw or stow 2 weapons at a time instead of 1 when you have this feat. Now, this feat is actually mathematically, generally speaking, going from a D6 to a D8 is +1 damage on average. And the fact that this doesn't boost your hit chance means that, generally speaking, getting an attribute increase in your main stat will make you do more damage, because you'll be going from, a D6 plus, well, you'll be adding 1 to your damage and accuracy instead of 1 just to your damage. And finally, one of the big ways that you can benefit a two-weapon fighting character is to add a damage rider of some kind. Because you're making more attacks, making each attack do more damage will do it'll have big results for you. So an example is you could take the Fey Touched feat for the Hex spell, or if you're a ranger, you could use something like Hunter's Mark and that kind of thing. And then that enables you to kind of add more damage to that flurry of attacks that you're getting out of using two weapons. So, what are the main competitors of dual wielding in terms of melee fighting styles? Well, there's two. The first is the sword and board kind of style, where you're fighting with a one-hand weapon and a shield. The most optimal for this is actually going to be a spear and a shield, because if you use a spear or a staff, actually, you can qualify for the polearm master feat to get a bonus action attack. These builds, if they're going for damage, will use the dueling fighting style, which will add +2 to your damage rolls as long as you're holding a weapon in one hand and not a weapon in the other hand. So a weapon and a shield does qualify. Next competitor is two-handers. So you're thinking like your great swords, your mauls, but the most optimal is generally a polearm, a glaive, or a halberd because again, these qualify for the polearm master feat and can get an extra attack with their bonus action there. So I'm gonna do a little comparison here between a couple of different sets. I'm gonna go from levels 1 to 8, and we're gonna look at it. The first one is gonna be a generic subclassless fighter, starting with 16 in their main attribute. We're going to look at a dual wielding character who can either be strength or dex primary using the two weapon fighting style. So they get to add their attribute to their bonus action attack. Then we're going to be looking at a sword and board type character who's going to be primarily using strength with the dueling fighting style, again, adding +2 to each of their damage rolls. And then we're going to be looking at a two-handed polearm user who's going to be strength primary with the great weapon fighting style. This lets you reroll 1s and 2s on your damage dice, and it's not a huge bump, but it is it is slight. And then in the next group, I'm going to be looking at the same things, but we're going to be using a race that starts with a free feat. And so those free feats are going to be Fey Touched for Hex on our dual wielder. So we're actually going to add a damage rider as our first free feat. Our sword and board character is going to be using Polearm Master to be able to attack with the haft of their spear. And then our two-handed polearm user will also be starting with Polearm Master to be able to make that bonus action attack. Now, with all of these comparisons between the first group and this group, this second group is always going to be a feat ahead. And so generally speaking, they're kind of a preview of what the damage numbers of the version that doesn't have a feat will be. All right, so at levels 1 to 3, these are kind of what the attack bonuses that everyone is going to have here. Importantly, our versions that begin with a feat have it, so they potentially have those extra attacks. And so here are the damage numbers. Here, I calculated all of these against armor classes of 10 and 15 just to see how the builds would compare. And so at this level, the dual wielder actually does the best for damage whether or not you have a feat, and in second place is the sword and board character, and in last place is the polearm user. Now at level 4, all of the builds get another feat. I've marked the feat that they're getting here, and again, basically all of the versions that aren't the version that started with a feat are one feat progression behind, and you can see the numbers here and kind of what they're getting and what they're doing. And with this next feat, here are the damage numbers against armor classes of 10 and 15. And here, for our versions that don't begin with a feat, the dual wielder is the best. But our versions that do have a feat, the dual wielder is best against the higher armor classes, but the variant human, our polearm user is the best against the lower armor classes because they've picked up the great weapon master feat at this point and can subtract 5 from their attack rolls to get +10 damage. Now, at level 5, all of the builds get extra attack, and their numbers are here. And then again, our calculations against armor classes of 10 and 15. And again, the winners haven't changed just with the addition of the extra attack feature. If you don't begin with a feat, the dual wielder is still the best here, but if you do begin with a feat, the dual wielder is the best against the higher armor classes, but the polearm user with great weapon master is winning against the lower armor classes. Here is our next feat selection and the damage dice thereof. And again, the version without the feat is following the versions that have the feat. Importantly, our polearm user is going to be picking up the Bless spell here, which will boost their attack rolls, which is a big deal because accuracy is one of their primary concerns. So with the third feat and extra attack, potentially the fourth feat if you began with one, here are what the numbers are looking like. And at this point, our versions that began with a feat, the polearm user is the best on damage, and our dual wielder is actually in second place. If you didn't begin with a feat here, dual wielding is still the best against the higher armor classes, but against a lower armor class without advantage, importantly, our polearm user is the best. Now, at level 8, this is going to be the fourth ability score increase, or the fifth one, and here's all the choices and kind of what the attack patterns are. Here are the numbers against armor classes of 10 and 15. And in both of these cases, now here at level 8 with our fourth feat and extra attack, the polearm user is the best regardless of whether or not you began with a feat. And if you did start with a feat, the spear and shield version is going to be the best here. I've also made some graphs here that will help. So for our versions that don't begin with a feat against an armor class of 10, you can kind of see that the dual wielder is the best until about level 6, and then our two-handed polearm version is the best. Against an armor class of 15, the dual wielder is still the best all the way up until level 8 or so, at which point the two-handed polearm barely passes it. For our versions that begin with a feat against an armor class of 10, the two-handed polearm is the best beginning at level 4, and the sword and shield kind of starts to pass at level 8. And versus the higher armor classes, the dual wielder is the best, although it's pretty close and comparable to the sword and board, all the way until level 6, at which point the two-handed polearm wins, and dual wielding goes from first to last by level 8. So, when is dual wielding good? And kind of as we've seen from the graphs, it's generally good at low levels when you don't have a consistent source of advantage. And this is mainly because a lot of our competitors need multiple feats to kind of get going. We have the advantage of we don't need a feat to make a bonus action attack, and we can just stack up our primary attribute. But when the others builds begin to catch up around that 4th or 5th feat, which is going to be around level 12 to 16 or further in a lot of games, you may actually be better just dual wielding. And so at those lower levels, that extra attack, and until all the builds can get their weapon feats and cap their primary attributes, the dual wielder is actually better. And so it can actually be pretty effective at those levels. Now, another thing here is if you're going to be doing a dexterity-based melee build, dual wielding is going to be your best way to get more damage. For dex-based melee in particular, you're not eligible for any polearm weapons, so you can't get a bonus attack otherwise. You're not eligible for any damage boost feats like Great Weapon Master. Now, especially if your character doesn't have a consistent use of their bonus action, dual wielding on a dex melee character will be very beneficial. Also, if you don't have the extra attack feature like a rogue, getting an extra bonus action attack with dual wielding can be very, very good. And then also, if you are a feat starved class, so basically anything that's not a fighter or a rogue, dual wielding can actually be really good in the long run. And this is because, again, the dual wielder build is going to be ahead of those other versions of the build in terms of damage output up until they start to get their 3rd and 4th feat, so around level 12. It's also important to note that the dual wielding build is going to have pretty much the same armor class as the two-handed polearm build, and the spear and shield build is always going to have the highest armor class due to actually having a shield. Now, another situation where dual wielding can be good is if your DM has given your party magic items that would be really nice to dual wield. Maybe you've gotten 2 like super good swords, or you have a weapon that gives you a passive bonus when you hold it, and that kind of thing. And so situationally, depending on what items are available in your game, utilizing 2 weapon fighting could be very powerful. And finally, it's always good to dual wield if it fits the flavor of your character. As we saw from the numbers, you're not really too far behind until you start to get to those very high levels. And dual wielding is very flavorful and thematic and can be quite evocative. And so, if it fits the flavor of your character, you should absolutely do it. So, thanks for watching. This has been kind of my comparison of dual wielding with other melee fighting styles in the game. Have you ever played a dual wielder? Please let me know in the comments and what you think about it. It's something I've been curious to try, and just going through the numbers in the process of making this video has made me want to try it. So, once again, my name is Nathan. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.